Last year, most of the year at least, I didn't have many bookish friends to talk about a lot of the books that I was reading. And the bookish friends that I do have read very high fantasy, which I do not. And now that we're deep enough into the new year, I want to talk about the books that I have still been thinking about that I read last year. Some positively, some negatively. Others may be sort of in a weird limbo. I'm not going to talk about every book that I read last year, just the ones that are still highlighted in my brain. I also have been trying a different mic setup that hasn't been the greatest for my shorts, but I'm trying a different recording setup once again that will hopefully give less pops and interference. So if that is in this video, then I deeply apologize. And if it's not, you're welcome. So I've organized this by genre, so you can jump ahead in the chapters if you wish, if I start talking about romance and that's not your thing. This is also, of course, in good fun. I will be talking crap about books that you may love, and I will be praising books that you absolutely hated, and that's okay. My opinion only has as much weight as you put behind it, but that being said, it does mean I'm giving you full permission to please suggest books that may fit the books that I love. Also, because I'll be talking about the books that have left impressions on me, I'm gonna have to mention the reasons why they left an impression, which may mean small spoilers. So I'll be putting up a picture of the book covers as I'm talking about them. If you're worried about me spoiling anything, just mute me while I talk about it, and when the book changes, you'll know I'm done talking about it. So I want to start with fantasy, because there's not really a whole lot. The first is Blood Over Brighthaven. I decided to read this because there was one booktuber that I really respect and love her opinion, and she gave it 5 stars. High praise. I watched a spoiler vlog. I knew everything that happened in the book for the most part, so it was on my radar. I was into it. And then a totally different YouTuber talked about it, and she also gave it 5 stars. And I know for a fact, even though these YouTubers have, I'm pretty sure, never interacted, they have very opposing opinions. So that really got me intrigued. So I got the audiobook on a skip the line for my library, and I remember doing the math on the percentage I had to read per day in order to finish it, because it's not a small book. This girl's trying to get into like the high magistrate, and women don't really do that. They're not allowed to. They're allowed to test for it, only to prove that they're not allowed. And so she breaks that, and in doing so, uncovers secrets about the society. And surprised to no one more than me, I loved it. I was so into it. And I think it's because of reasons that, like, I don't really see anyone else talk about. The matching system was really unique, and I enjoyed that. But the thing that helped convince me that I was lying to myself and that it was not a 4.5, it was in fact a 5, the portrayal of the systematic racism in the book, that it was believable. It was so believable, and that's what really got me. There wasn't this like sudden change of heart or anything like that. And part of the reason I think I liked it so much was because I read it, I think immediately after, if not very recently after, the City We Became. Wasn't into it. Strongly disliked it. I don't know. It didn't sit right with me. The weird thing is that I think I love N.K. Jemisin's writing, because I tried the 5th season, also DNF'd it, but it's just so, I can picture it so easily. The theater in my mind is effortless when reading her, but I really don't care about her stories. I really, really strongly don't. But that book has everything and anything to do with racism, and it does not let you forget it, because it's literally the prompt of, what if we did Lovecraft in reverse? And the book tells you that multiple times. Another I still think about, and will probably always forever think about, is the Lord of the Rings series. And thank God I opened up this series with The Hobbit, because I loved it. It definitely felt really young, especially at first, but it pulled me in. And I ended up really enjoying The Hobbit by the end of it. Enough to buy a physical copy. But when I moved on to The Lord of the Rings, in an attempt to bond with my high fantasy friends, it was a failure. It was a slog. It was the biggest slog and a half to get through. And I honestly have not met someone that like the series, so it feels kind of like a generational thing, but it's not as if none of my friends don't read classics or something like that, you know what I mean? The book series just hasn't connected with anyone I know, except for The Hobbit. I remember talking to my neighbor about it, and she was saying she thinks that the first book in the Lord of the Rings series is so much better than the rest of the series, is because he was just writing The Hobbit again. and that's true. It was still just so jaunty and fun and a breath of fresh air in terms of like the tone between Bilbo and Frodo. But then after the first book, it's like, holy crap. It's a real choice. It's a real choice and a half because I know he wrote this to be one book, right? So to write the second book as half of it is following one group and the other half is following another group and have zero interconnections and creating that like tension and use of irony, like it's not as if that wasn't a thing. It was so awful to like force yourself through this book. And then in the very last one, the story of what they're trying to do and get at ends like 49% of the way through the book. The rest of the book is them getting home and then getting home and then getting home. And then they're home and they gotta do stuff. And then it's a year later and they're still home. And then there's a prologue. And I did not fucking read that. I was not reading a prologue. I was so desperate for this book to be done. And again, I've seen a lot of people be like, yes, I don't know why Lord of the Rings genuinely, like this series has the love that it does. So if you're thinking about it, read The Hobbit. Read The Hobbit. That's what you want to actually read, not the series. So yeah, those are the only fantasy books that really stood out. Let me look. I have my Notion tracker also pulled up to double check my work. Yeah. Oh, I actually don't think I created a sci-fi section, so we can get into sci-fi. That's a very easy segue from fantasy, because most of these things I have as sci-fi are also tagged as fantasy. I did, in fact, much like everyone else, including yourself, most likely, it's like a 90% chance, I did read Dungeon Crawler, Carl, and I enjoyed it. I will say, I personally did not find it anything to write home about. I still gave it 4.5 stars, the first book. I'm on to the third right now. I just finished the third. The writing is so extremely simplistic. It's so very see-through and transparent, and don't get me wrong, it still finds ways to surprise me and have like fun, nice twists. But I don't get the hype. So if you need someone to convince you, what is it called? De-influence you from needing to read something. If you want a real casual read, if you're into D&D or the idea of it, it's so extremely okay, but very fun. Another one that surprised me was Old Man's War by John Scalzi, because, well, segue, I found out that Harlan Ellison had a story in Love, Death, and Robots Volume 2, so I had to read Love, Death, and Robots Volume 1, and then get into 2, and through 1, I found John Scalzi, and am in love with his writing. It's so casual, and humorous, and I guess similarly to, Dungeon Crawler, but much better written. An Old Man's War is about when people are like 70, they have an option to join this space war because they're promised new bodies. They're refreshed. They don't have to deal with all of the human. I've since read the second book in DNF the series because I am just not into the war politics, unfortunately, but I do need to read more John Scalzi in the future because I just love his writing. One of the things about An Old Man's War that I ended up adding in like my category of most loved characters is how much the main guy was like, I miss my wife. I love my wife so much. I love my wife. It was so cute. I love it. Oh my god, that book had me. Speaking of Harlan Ellison, I read his strategy guide. I reread the strategy guide of I Have No Mouth, the video game, because I read it in high school, so early high school too, so more than 10 years ago. And it was fun with the hindsight of like knowing how to read and dissect writing more than not at all. But if you don't know, I Have No Mouth is about a supercomputer that takes over the world and is torturing 7 people? 5 people. Wow, where did 7? And it's originally a short story. The video game is an alternative take on the world that he's created with the same characters. It's a very classic short story of the warnings of the computers and AI, but also just not trusting your main character and not trusting the voice that you're being told that's happening, because it's told through Ted's perspective, and you're told more concretely, at least in the book, how unreliable of a narrator Ted is. And there are very subtle hints in the short story about leading you towards that direction. And I read it along with my husband playing it. So that was a fun experience. That being said, it is a game guide, so there's editing issues that aren't totally accurate to the game, but also just writing. There are some issues. There weren't as many, but I could definitely suggest it to any big I Have No Mouth fan, because he has a foreword and then he has an interview at the end, and it really goes in depth of what they wanted to do with these characters in the book. And I realized I wasn't talking into the mic. I think what's also really important to me is that he worked on this story and that he was a part of the video game, because it's well known how much he hates computers, and he was told he would never do a video game, so he said, "Fuck you, I'm gonna do a video game." So yeah, there's been a lot of Ellison love in my life, especially with my short story series going on Instagram and my shorts on YouTube. So let's just get into horror. Let's rip the Band-Aid off. It's what I mostly read. Another thing that I reread last year from high school was Dracula. And this was fun because I actually hadn't annotated in my... Sorry, I keep hitting the table. I actually don't know how much that's destroying the mic. I didn't annotate in I Have No Mouth because I remember reading it mostly on the bus, but this I read for homework. So I annotated quite a bit, but most of my annotations were highlighting the dates because I thought that would be important, because I thought it would be non-linear. And there were a couple times where it was. I just didn't actually catch on. But it was very fun to reread this and see some of my notes of being like, oh my god, I don't care. And then 10 years later, also being like, oh my god, I do not care. Apparently it's pretty universally agreed that about 75% of the way through, it gets extremely slow and, like, monotonous. But I still love the shit out of this. I think there's something very scary about reading classics. It really sheds a light on the fact that, you are the other in this situation. You are not what this book was written for. So being not the target audience and not understanding fully the climate that it's written in is very intimidating, but I think important, especially that feeling of being other and being on the outside looking in is more relatable to some people than others. So, side tangent, that's why I love classics. I think that's why it's important. But Dracula was so accessible, even still. The language isn't too incredibly difficult to understand. There are some things that I think if you don't force yourself to put it in perspective, sometimes it's a little, like, unbelievable. But you know what, so what? It's a vampire story, like, get over it. I've heard people complain about the shorthand, same with them not understanding blood types, and I don't know how subtle the sexism and racism in this book is. Certainly not the sexism. But it feels silly to say this classic holds up, but it really does. And I think it's a fantastic step into trying classics if you're not used to it. 25 was also the year I got into Stephen King. And I opened the year, I'm pretty sure, with reading The Shining. And I was hooked. Hooked right off the bat. Hot take. 5 stars. Who would have thought? This is like an easy, I don't know if I like Stephen King, so I'm gonna read The Shining. You know, a good, like, toe dip to me. Because right off the bat in like the first couple of chapters, if not the very first chapter, Jack's intrusive thoughts of people and like how he should behave versus how he wants to act and react to things. I love it. It's exactly why I enjoy Stephen King's writing sometimes. I also think Wendy is the most human female character King has ever written, because writing is just so male-gazy, and I didn't totally feel like that was such an issue in this book. And then I read more Stephen King, but I have to change my battery first, because naturally, immediately after reading The Shining, I was like, well, I have to read Dr. Sleep, and Dr. Sleep was fine. It was good. I enjoyed it. I don't understand the hate. I mean, I do. I get not wanting something you love expanded upon years later. It's like Rosemary's Baby. Yeah, the sequel is Rosemary's Child, I think. And everyone's like, don't read it. But I read Misery, in terms of Stephen King. That's what I read next. Oh, no, I didn't. I read Nightmares and Dreamscapes after that. Sorry, touched the mic again. And that didn't satisfy me at all. I think I might hate his short stories, actually. They feel way too much like prompts for a next book that just didn't get published, or like it didn't go anywhere, so he was like, short story, I guess. Not into it. Misery felt too much like torture porn. Salem's Lot I read not long after reading Dracula, and let me tell you, I didn't know anything about Salem's Lot. I love going into books almost totally blind, knowing as little as possible. And then the intro to the book is Stephen King saying, well, I wrote this because I wanted to write Dracula, but modern day, and I wanted to throw the fucking book across the room. I was so pissed. Some people that I saw were like, I read this right after reading Dracula, and it made me love it even more. I read this right after reading Dracula, and I think it made me hate it even more. So I gave a great disservice to Salem's Lot. I did not like what it was doing. So, after that, I had to take a very long break from King because I was worried that, I just liked The Shining and Dr. Sleep, and it was a flash in the pan because everything I read after that, I was like, and then I read it. So I read it for a monthly book challenge, and I started it the month prior, because I was like, well, I'm not going to read it an entire month. That's crazy. It's a 1,000-page book. So I started it, and then got halfway through after a week and forced myself to stop. And then immediately, as soon as the next month started, I finished it. I like, it is something, it really drew me in. It restored my faith in Stephen King, not to be dramatic, but I was like, okay, I do actually like this guy sometimes, but not often enough for him to be like, a holy grail, best man in the world. Still a little too male-gazy for my taste. And it's, again, something that bothered me that I don't actually see many other people talking about when they complain about this book, because there's a lot to complain about. But there's one point in it where Beverly's friend, as an adult, she knows where Beverly went. The husband is trying to find out where she went, and so he takes it out on Beverly's friend. And her friend is the one character in the book that is strongly labeled as a feminist. Maybe a very minor trigger warning for the rest of the talk of this book, but the abusive husband, takes it out on her, tries to force her to talk, and she doesn't. And the one thing that gets this feminist to talk is cutting her face. And then she goes, oh no, my face. And then tells him. And to me, that felt mean on Stephen King's part, because it felt very like, you think you're feminist, and you think you don't need to care about how you look because that's, men putting values on you and shit. But as soon as your face is cut, you give into it, even though I've done all this other stuff. And it's just, it made me uncomfortable. It really, really upset me. I would believe it that that's just me putting like a round peg in a square hole, but I kind of don't think so, because again, she's the only character in the entire book that is labeled as a feminist, and the only thing that breaks her is hurting her face. So that upset me. Now with like the movies and show and stuff, it's like my favorite series. I really enjoyed it. Genuinely so excited to reread it. And The Shining, especially because I'm like, what's her face? Wendy is such a human character. Now that I have more perspective on King's writing, as well as just dissecting literature in general, I want to know if that holds up, or if I'm just like blowing smoke on my ass. But I loved it. I understand why people can't read it and won't, and extremely valid. That I was more upset about the dog stuff in that book, frankly. Moving on, another horror I read was Into the Drowning Deep by Susan Meyer Grant, right? That's her name? Yeah, Into the Drowning Deep was my first major portrayal from getting a book suggestion from a booktuber. I hated this book. I really didn't like it. I know a lot of people have issues with, and so did I, to be fair, but I've seen recently that people also have issues with her writing in the sense that it feels as if she's like trying to fill out a bingo card of diversity and representation, and it just doesn't feel natural the way it's done. And the fact that there were so many characters in this book definitely hammers that home. Everyone felt like an archetype to the little role and like what they were meant to play, and they were an inch deep, and that was it. None of these characters were fleshed out in the slightest, and so they weren't fun to follow. And the other couple things that really very much upset me, the world that this book created just didn't make sense to me either. So, mild spoilers. I'm more complaining because the book treats it as a, like, twist, and I'm like, what do you mean? This isn't a twist. So just FYI, if you want to skip the rest of this book. But two things that upset me. At one point, they are doing stuff to a mermaid, and the big scientist lady is like, oh, hold the phone. Big revelation. This isn't a mermaid. It's a siren. Into the Drowning Deep is about mermaids who murder people. That's what it's about. Like, that's the back of the book. This lady's sister dies because of a mermaid attack, and like over the years these people who believe in mermaids have gathered together and go down to the Mariana Trench. It acts as if no one's ever been down the Mariana Trench, even though they have. And if that's the one description, I guess also the mermaids, between this book and real life, there needed to be more for me not to immediately put this book in real life, but with mermaids. And like, it just doesn't make sense to me. We've been into the Mariana Trench since the 60s. So to be like, that's where the mermaids are hiding. This place no one's ever been. Except for those few times people have been there, but that doesn't count. The thing that upset me about the siren was that, like, the day before reading that, I was describing this book to my husband and complaining about it. And I was like, well, there's mermaids that murder people. And he's like, oh, they're sirens. I was like, no. The book is very explicit about them being mermaids, not sirens. And he was like, okay, they're sirens. And I'm like, no. And then the book is like, wait a second, they're sirens. It just didn't make sense. The choice of making that into like this big moment, fuck off. Let's complain about more horror. Let's not. Most people complain. Most people I've heard from strongly dislike Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. And I may be the only person. I'm not, obviously. I didn't mind this book. And I think about it a lot because everyone hates it. And I'm like, should I reread this? Maybe I'm insane. I went into it being like, this is a fun Japanese horror book. And I feel like maybe it's because everyone else went into it expecting like genuine spooks and horrors, and I was like, camp! So I went in with the right tone and enjoyed it. But I have not liked anything else I read that Cassandra Khaw's written. I read Heavy Salt. Now the Salt Grows Heavy. Hey, I was on the right track. Strongly disliked that. I wasn't into it. I couldn't tell you why. I don't remember, but I was not impressed. And everyone else is like, hated Blackened Teeth, love The Salt Grows Heavy, and I'm like, I've also read another one. Oh, what did she write in horror noir? A Darker Shade of Noir, by Joyce Carol Oates edited it. And Cassandra Khaw was in that. She wrote Muzzle. What the fuck was Muzzle? Yeah. I don't Not a fan. Not my favorite. But, and I mentioned this in my last vlog, I think it's just because it's splatterpunk, and I think I just don't like splatterpunk. Who knows? But I don't dislike her enough to, like, have fun reading it. Like, Eric LaRocca, people love his shit. I don't get it. But I have fun reading it because it's a hate read. I do not like Cassandra's Caw writing, and I really just think it's because it's too splatterpunky and gory. I'm like zoning those parts of the book out, and because it's so much of the book, I'm zoning out the entire book. So that made me it for horror. Oh, another book I strongly didn't like. Maybe it counts more of a thriller, I feel, than a horror. Maybe not a thriller, like a mystery horror. Dead of Winter by Darcy Oates. No, not Oates. Coates. This couple goes on a retreat and gets snowed in. And something fun is that I started reading this the first snow day of the year. So that was immersive. I did not hate this. I gave it 2.5 stars. There's a scene in this about teeth. Teeth happens, right? And in that scene, I think it like kind of solidified that I was like, oh, this is the murderer. Just if you've read it, that's where I was like, oh. And then the book treats the reveal of the murderer. It's the end of the book. That's it. It's ta-da! And then they give their monologue, and the book is over, essentially. And so, hold on. There was no point in me reading this book. If I was able to guess who the murderer was, and the very end of the book is just you telling me, why did I read it? Why did I continue reading it? Why did I not just flip through the end and be like, oh, and then toss it aside? Every chapter ended as if it was like an episode cliffhanger, and that got real tiring real quick. And I get it, sometimes you're like, wee, fun suspense as an author, like, oh no, a cliffhanger, who's gonna fall? And like, every chapter, man, bro, every chapter, we got real negative here with this horror. I like Lovecraft Country. I think it did what the City We Became was trying to do significantly better. The very end hinders on this one decision that I think there is zero chance, there's zero tension of the wrong decision being made. So it just, I felt like that fell incredibly flat. It didn't make sense to me for that to be a grand finale. Model Home also upset me at the very end because ACAB does not mean don't arrest a pedophile. That was a choice. So every time I see that book, it's like, I did read a somewhat decent amount of nonfiction in an attempt to stay slightly positive. Fahrenheit 182 really surprised me. I think because I read it, no, I didn't read it recently after reading Face It, which is Debbie Harry's memoir. That was fine. It was a little like, I don't know who this is for, because it didn't feel all that enlightening for like a Debbie Harry fan, but like a Blondie fan is the only one that's gonna read it. So it didn't feel like it kind of was super necessary to read. Fahrenheit 182 was really fun. I really liked it. It is the same, he wrote it in part with the same editor who wrote Sold Out, or Sell Out. Yeah, Dan Ozzie. Sell Out is also fun. It kind of requires you to know about these bands already. It doesn't hold your hand if you don't know who they are. But if you're like, I only want to read about Blink-182 or My Chemical Romance, like, it's still fine. Fahrenheit 182 is a really good memoir. I really enjoyed it. It gave a lot of insights. But the couple of nonfictions that stand out to me that I read last year are, one is The Body Keeps the Score. It's about, like, trauma and how your body holds that. So that was insightful. It is a very triggering book. The first half is far more educational than the second half. But it's just, you gotta read this with a critical mind. He gave a lot of really specific case studies that helped really specific people. Otherwise, I think this book could do a lot of harm. Maybe not discredit medication, but it does talk it down a little bit. He's like, it's not necessary all the time, which may be true, but also it's a very dangerous argument to make and to read if you're not prepared for that. And speaking of mildly dangerous nonfiction, I read We Were Feminist Once. From Riot Girl to Cover Girl, the buying and selling of a political movement. Now, that sounds pretty damning, right? That sounds very like pop culture adopting feminism to fit the mold that pop culture wants. The tone feels very negative while kind of claiming to not be. I feel it was very weird, and her arguments were not solid, and there were things that she was saying that felt like it was positive, and I was taking like, this is going against your argument. Like, what are you saying? Even in the epilogue, so I was like, that's it? That's the note you want to end on in the book? And then in the epilogue, she's like, so what am I trying to say with this? I don't know. And I'm like, why did I read this if you don't know what you're trying to say? Oh my god, this pissed me off. And I wrote in it, and I tabbed in it, and now I have to keep it until I have someone else to dump it onto. And this may be my bias talking, which is why I'm talking about it now in hopes that I could talk about it with someone else. Because to me, 2016 was a very pivotal year, or at least like in a pivotal time of feminism in terms of pop culture and the status quo and all that kind of stuff. Because that's when this book was published, which means it was largely written in 2015. Okay, 2017 has the Women's March in Washington be America's biggest protest at the time. So she wrote this not long before that, being like, pop culture's adopting feminism. This is good, but it's also kind of bad. And she's like kind of talking shit about it. Strongly dislike this. And I'm very curious if it's just because it was written at a bad time, or maybe it's because in like 2016, 17, I was in my first year of college. So I was becoming more feminist and more aware. So I don't know if that's just me, or if that was the general total zeitgeist of everything. I don't know. Either way, this book didn't make a good argument. Whatever it was trying to argue, it wasn't successful. Also, the audiobook, it said ex machina instead of ex machina, and said zines instead of zines. Because, and the author is an editor of a famous zine. Feel like your audiobook should know what a zine is. Let's see. I got a few books that don't really fit into any of those other categories because I just don't have anything else that is notable like it. Shogun was actually the first book I decided to read as an adult and get into, which is another 1,000-page long book. I did read it in 2 parts. Loved the first part. I have very fond memories of walking my dog in the snow in the playground, listening to the audiobook of part 1, and just like taking my time going home because I didn't want to stop reading. And then there was part 2. There's a couple in part 2 where the lovey-dovey-ness of it all was very annoying. It was very annoying and very sudden. Like, it was like nothing, and then it was constant. I loved the characters in part 1, and I really enjoyed the, like, fish out of water aspect of it. But it just got too war politics, and I stopped enjoying it. Jonathan Abernathy, You Were Kind, by Molly McGee. This wasn't a 5-star for me. I love the narration of this book. I love how it was written, which is very, like, it's very, Truman Show-esque. The biggest complaint I see about this book is the tone of their narration, which is just, again, it's just one of those things that it's like, it's my favorite part, and it's other people's most hated part of it. Totally drawn into this world while reading it. I was so excited and so desperate for Molly McGee to write more books so I can get into them. It's about this man who is a loser. He's not a scumbag loser. Like, he's not like you want to kill him. He's just a loser. He's having a hard time. And he gets this job, and people are like, you gotta leave this job. It's not like it's a bad job. And he's like, I'm doing a bad job. I thought I was doing really good. I need this job. And they're like, dude, this is not the job you want. And he's like, I kind of like this job. I'm having a good time. So I had its issues, but special place in my heart. And finally, one of the very few romances I read last year, It Don't Want You Like a Best Friend, and its sequel, You're the Problem, It's You. Now, first of all, awful name for books. Don't Want You Like a Best Friend is fine. That's a fine name for a book. You're the Problem, comma, It's You is too long of a name. Also, doesn't really make sense with the book. It's described, well, first of all, queer historical romance. So that's fun. First is a lesbian couple. Second book is a gay couple. And they all know each other. So it's, there's spoilers for the first book if you read the second one, but not enough that you're like, shit, what's happening, I enjoy Don't Want You Like a Best Friend more than the second one because the characters in the second one were just a little too blending together. There were a few times where I kind of forgot who was talking and the history behind which and mixed them up. But I liked the tension in the second book more. It's described as an enemies to lovers, and it's not. They're rivals at most. And the switch from rival to lover was a little too quick. Not quick, like it doesn't happen right away. It was just kind of sudden. These did have some spice. The second book had more spice than the first. Couldn't tell you how much. I don't know that scale. It didn't feel like crude or anything. But that's all I had time for you today. I hope you enjoyed this more chatty, casual video. There's been a lot of stress in this household lately. More time than I expected has been taken up by my little short story series that I'm doing, so I am taking a break next week, just a week-long break from doing that so I can catch up more on vlogs and read books outside of short stories. If anything I've talked about draws you into suggesting another book, please let me know. Comment below so I can in fact check it out. But this was fun. Some people may say I did this 5 months late talking about 2025 books. Others, like myself, may say I did it because I finally have enough hindsight and enough distance from last year to make the books that I'm still thinking about really stand out in my mind. So if you liked the video, please like it and consider subscribing. As always, if you're interested in more videos like this or body doubling read with me's and reading vlogs. I'm trying to experiment more on my read with me's, so maybe doing less of them. But until then, until next week, until next time, thanks for watching.